So I suppose my situation in this is that Ella has just asked me if if I want to do this, if I'm willing to do this, and of course I am. So I see it as sort of just a forum for some information. Now, important for me to say that these topics, some of them I might have some knowledge of, and others, a topic might be given and I'd scratch my head and not know where to begin with. So what I'm sharing is just my own information. There's people out there that are a lot more knowledgeable on, different aspects. So just bearing that in mind, take what you want from it and leave behind what doesn't feel right. That's important for me to say anyway. My own past, I suppose I doing it for quite a while. Doing, I suppose, in therapy and doing therapy and all sorts of associated stuff for quite a while, through Jung and through Gestalt. Although I would probably describe myself as being quite eclectic in all the different areas that I've sort of been through myself. So I sort of bring all of what I am to the table. So that includes a fair bit, I guess, at this stage. But having said that, I'm not an expert. I'm still learning, just like everyone else. So, and there's a joy in that for me as well. So that's why I'm quite happy to do this, because I get a lot from it as well. Okay, so the Wounded Healer. When I heard this topic being trotted in, I go, "Oh my God, oh no, not this!" Where do I begin with this? This is so hard and difficult, and it's immediately thrown into all of my wounds, my insecurities, and all this stuff started coming up for me about, sure, I don't know, and where would I begin? And mythology. Oh no, not mythology. I've forgotten all my mythology. I used to know it once upon a time, but now I don't know it. And Hannah gave me a diagram and said, "Listen, see what you can do around this, and I'll maybe talk about that later on." But it was sort of deep Jungian stuff. I was like, "Oh, so heavy." So that's where I began from, and then I thought, well, that's not really where I can maybe bring benefit. Where I can bring benefit is from a different position or a different angle. So I got myself out of my hole very quickly. But the Wounded Healer, I mean, it is what it says. Two aspects of an archetype, wounded and healer, and to see it in opposition, to see these as two opposites, is perhaps a way in to this. Okay, so I am wounded and I seek healing. The hot and cold, big and small, light and dark. Two opposites. They stand opposite each other, and as such, they represent the opposition within an archetype. Now, the archetype of the self, Jung describes as the central organizing archetype. So the archetype of the self, the main archetype, the big one, the one that stands above all, the God above gods, as it were. Right. So this central organizing archetype organizes everything underneath it. It brings life to it. It is, in terms of where aliveness is channeled from, well, beyond the archetype of the self, there is no quality, no discernible quality as such. You're into sort of the Dharmakaya, the land of nothing. So there's no discernible qualities. But in trying to identify the archetype of the self, well, there's aliveness. This thing called aliveness, this experience, creation has happened. And then it starts to become more specific or more discriminated as it sort of comes down the line into the various different archetypes, which are much more to do with human qualities. the basic sort of archetype of the self, the wounded healer, it refers much more to vitality and healthiness and evolution. So to see healing as an evolutionary process, to understand healing, what do we mean by healing? What are we seeking? Well, healing is a self-creation, not a small s, but a big S. Self-creating self, new self. If I cut my arm open, on a nail and it heals, well, I don't. You could say, oh, my old arm is healed, but I much prefer to say, oh, look at my new arm. I have a brand new arm that's not torn open. It's not bleeding. It's been repaired, replaced. So this quality of healing, to see it as an evolution, and as such, it puts us, the evolution within ourselves, it puts us beyond, it puts it beyond our grasp. I am not capable of organizing my own evolution. There's some things that are just beyond me, and that's one of them. So we're sort of in the lap of the gods. We're sitting with the transcendent. This evolution is a transcendent function. It's overcoming a problem. It's part of my self-regulating mechanism, part of the self-regulating function of the psyche, to use Carl Rogers' words. So this to understand the archetype that we're looking at is important in this. If we were looking at the archetype of the hero, well, that's more human. I can. It has much more shape to it. Here's me driven to do these heroic actions and go on this path. Whereas the wounded healer, it's an integration. It's a coming. It is, I think, very much an evolution. So that's the first thing that was in my mind to say. Now, okay, to understand it, you can read lots of mythology and you can see where it came from, and it's bringing in a line of mythological genealogy a mile long. So I've forgotten it all, to be quite honest. So if you're interested in that end of it, get a book, go on the internet and do research. And it is interesting to know the history of it and the stories behind it, because it's part of maybe it's part of the knowledge that you might need to deepen your understanding, to bring you closer to it, into association with it. But really, it's like the age-old question: do I want to go down the path of being an intellectual, or do I want to go down the path of being a practitioner? Do I want to play music, or do I want to be a music critic? Which would I rather be? So my path has very much been towards being a practitioner rather than the intellectual. So my introverted intuition rather than thinking would be my main one. Introverted intuitive feeler, with sensation last. So anyway, there's my typology. So the qualities of the inner healer, as we start looking at this from the eyes of being a practitioner, we're really asking, okay, how can I constellate this archetype? How can I get it to work? If I have all of my wounds going on, how can I identify the inner healer within myself in order to achieve this progression? And the answer, unfortunately, is it would be very difficult to constellate this on my own. I need the symbol. I need access to the healer. But if the inner healer in me is unconscious, I have no access to it. So I'm sort of stuck in my wounds. I'm stuck in my own unconsciousness, and I've no switch to turn the light on. So enter a therapist. This is where, the therapy really begins to happen, because as soon as I step into the therapeutic relationship, the therapist is going to bring these more awakened qualities to the table for me. The therapist, through his or her own therapeutic process, will have constellated this archetype in their self. So as they step in, they're bringing this to the table. They are acting as the symbol, the living symbol. So it's like walking into the room and finding Jesus Christ in the room. If you could identify Jesus as being the real Jesus, you'd be blown over. Well, in exactly the same way, stepping into the therapeutic environment and seeing the God in front of you, or the self in front of you, it would be quite an inflationary experience. So you very quickly you'd stop seeing the therapist and you'd start seeing this light in the corner, which I suppose is fine in one way, but you'd need to be careful in another way. But that's basically what's happening here. The therapist is holding the energy of the healer in the room. So through your relationship with therapy, as you engage in your own therapeutic process, and as the therapist opens up a relationship with you, and as you begin to extend trust, your trust, into the relationship that the therapist opens up for you, and I'm choosing those words quite specifically, as you begin to engage with the therapist and the therapy, through the skill of the therapist, through the presence of the therapist, uh, doing what they do, then you find a path, and the path really is a path towards clarity of mind, clarity of heart. You start to educate yourself. You start to realize. You start to gain more insight into the nature of your own unconsciousness. Now, what you're basically looking at is your shadow. What you're working on is your own shadow material. So whatever brought you into the room, that's the beginning of the path. And look down at your feet. Look at where you stand yourself. Do you see? Don't be worried about the bright light in the far side of the room if that's what it is. Checking down into your own story, your own material. That's the beginning of this process of constellating the archetype. So the role of the therapist in this is to be aware, basically, is to hold awareness of their own process and the process that's going on in the room. It all sounds very complicated, but it's actually not, because it's what you do. As a therapist, it's what you do with every client, and it's what you've done with yourself in your own sort of therapeutic process. So you apply your skills, basically. So in doing that, the therapist's awareness needs to be focused on their own self, their own process, because as soon as you step in to the dyad with the client, you're going to be in contact with their unconscious. You're moving into a relationship with everything that they are. Their conscious self, what sits at the table, and also their unconscious self, what's sitting underneath the table. So, and similarly with yourself, you're bringing in your own shadow material. So, you got your above the table stuff and you got your underneath the table stuff. And all of this is interacting. All of it is alive. All of it has the quality of aliveness running through it. So the relationship underneath the table is equally as real as the relationship above the table. The conscious relationship above the table is just what you can see and know more easily. But the relationship underneath the table is perhaps more important to keep an eye on, because, oh, where's my shadow? Well, that's an important question to be able to ask yourself. Where is your shadow? A therapist's shadow very much is in the realm of power. So you got to be aware of how you use your power and how your power is using you in relation to the client's stuff, to their story. So the power aspect of the therapist, my shadow. Well, my shadow is going to be based around my family dynamic. It's all to do with unmet needs. Coming back to this place of unmet needs, where I developed where I forged my sword and sharpened the blade in order to get my needs met. Who did I need to kill next? So this sort of attachment within myself through my unmet needs is where I fall into power, where I become unconscious. So if I identify with the client's illness, which is like an unconscious form of empathy, if through my presence in the room, I start to unconsciously identify with their illness, their victim, their wounded self, if I'm not aware of my need, well, then I could very, very quickly empower the client's woundedness in order that I remain, on the outside of it. And I then enter into a process of trying to heal myself at arm's length, working through the client's process, healing my stuff. Do you understand? If I step in to that dyad with the client, into the relationship with the client, and I'm not aware of my own needs, unmet needs, well, then that relationship is going to be an unconscious relationship. And I will project those unmet needs into the client's story. And I will start to identify with my unmet needs through the client's story. And I will pull this process into its unconscious aspect. Now, in its unconscious aspect, I'm sitting in the chair as healer, and the client is over there sitting in the chair as the wounded self. And sure, I'm good and they're bad. Do you see power? I'm above, they're beneath. I'm superior, they're inferior. And sure, this is the perfect place for me to play with my shadow. So the therapy goes on and on and on and on and on, and there's no benefit. In fact, there's the reverse. The process becomes more unconscious. And what will happen is it'll just blow itself asunder, more than likely. I will destroy the process. So you need to be aware of your own shadow material, basically, in order that you can have a healthy working relationship with the client's unconscious. On the other hand, if I'm holding a clearer space in the room as therapist, if I step in and I sort of know where my limit is, and if I have a sense of my own unmet needs, if I can keep the dog on a tight lead and not let it run mad around the room, then I can create a healthy relationship, a good relationship with the client. And in the goodness of that relationship, the archetype is constellated. Within the goodness of the relationship, within the honesty of the relationship, within the clarity of the relationship, within these qualities that I bring in to the relationship, these qualities are the constellation of the inner healer. So if we flip this over sideways and talk through a point of Buddhism and talk about the four immeasurables: love, compassion, joy, and equanimity. Love, compassion, joy, and equanimity. Equanimity means stability of mind and heart. So if you look at these four qualities, love, compassion, joy, and equanimity as being qualities of the self, capital S, then these are the qualities that the therapist needs to have available to him or her within the therapeutic relationship. So we talk about unconditional positive regard. We talk about love. Well, love is a big word, and unconditional positive regard is a long sentence. So to know these qualities as a felt experience is much more important than to be able to write them down on a page and get your spelling right. You see, this is the land of practicality. You have to be able to go in there, heart and soul, as it were. You have to have done your own work in order to be able to hold this numinosity within yourself, small s. You see, you have to have identified your own, you have to have opened the ego self axis within your own process. You have to have touched the self, capital S, within yourself, small s. You see, you have to have had that experience within yourself of meeting love, of opening up to your own compassion, your own self-acceptance, and deeper than that, compassion, which is the wisdom heart. So compassion is different than love. Love is more the feminine principle, but compassion has logos in it. To be compassionate doesn't mean you're naive. It's not about loving the world, loving the unlovable. Compassion is also a great teacher. So it's the educator. It is the embodiment of this inner healer to hold compassion, the wisdom of compassion, to embrace the woundedness within yourself is an act of compassion. And as you embrace the woundedness within yourself, you enter into a process with your own shadow material, and you start to work through it. The healer archetype is constellated within yourself. Now, all of that doesn't just happen. All of that is the product of your own effort and work. So why am I doing this work on myself? I'm doing this work on myself to be able to self-accept and develop this quality of compassion. You see, which then I can bring into my relationships, not just working relationships, but all my relationships. And it changes the way you see things. It changes the way you interact with things. It changes your position from being in the world as a wounded person, a half person, dragging one leg behind you. It allows you to walk up tall, strong, and steady. You can stand upright in the world. In within this environment of self-acceptance that you hold for yourself. Now, they're all the qualities of the self. Big S again. They're the qualities of the self manifested in you, through you. So in knowing this stuff, in knowing it intellectually, and in having gone through the process of it yourself at an experiential level, you step into the room with the client, and the client begins to share with you their story and express their pain into the room. And of course, you're going to empathically be drawn into the world of the client. Now, this empathic relationship, this empathic environment is full of compassion. It's full of stability, equanimity. It's full of stability, tall, strong, and steady. It's full of your own steadiness. You're holding the space open. It's full of your own courage and strength. Do you see? You're unwavering in your sort of devotion to compassion, not to the client, your devotion to compassion, your devotion to the self. Do you see? Your relationship is with the self, and secondly with the client. So as you step into this empathic environment, you're not getting washed away in the current of the client's shadow. You're not going to get washed away. You're going to be able to hold your position relative to the client's story, to their power dynamics, to their cry for help, to their want to put you up on a stool, on a high stool, so that they can sort of sit on your knee and be nursed by you, whether you be male or female. Do you see that you're not going to succumb to their little wounded child, their abandoned self, because you've already looked at your abandoned self. You know what it is. You know the story. You see, and in self-accepting, you haven't tried to fix it. You haven't tried to fix your own wounds. You've found it from within yourself to accept them. You found it from within yourself. The inner healer within yourself has constellated sufficiently for you to be able to accept the unacceptable within yourself. Do you see? Nothing, you haven't tried to have power over it, which is really a beginning position. But you've moved into a much more evolved relationship, a much more mature relationship within yourself. The wound in yourself has been part and parcel of your own maturity. The wound is the path. You see, it's not an inconvenience. It's a gift. It's a grace as it happens. In the beginning, unrecognized, but that's because of your own ignorance, unfortunately. But see, as the process matures, as you go through your own therapeutic process, you'll notice I'm talking a lot about your own process and your own therapy and all that, and that's because it's important. It's necessary. You see, if you haven't done your own work, well, then none of this can happen. You'll sit slap bang in the way, and you'll block it all, and you'll identify unconsciously with what the client is bringing into the room, and it'll become a power over dynamic. Anything but healing. You see, it'll become more entertainment for yourself in the latest edition of your own story. But as somebody who does their work, then you're bringing the more distilled qualities into the room. This process of distillation has happened. You have purified. Okay, you've purified. The therapeutic process is a process of purification. You're distilling out the good from the bad. You're separating the 90% gold from your shadow and the 10% stuff that you want to leave behind. You see, as you work through it, there's a cliche. I don't know what the Danish equivalent would be, obviously, but in order to integrate, you got to separate. So the separatio, the stages of alchemy, the separation of this from that. So there's a certain quality of mind required, which is developed in your own work. There's a certain quality of heart required, which you develop in your own work. And this then leads to the development of compassion for yourself, which is the product, the fruition of your own work. And then that quality of compassion comes into the room with you, tall, strong, and steady. You're able to hold the space with the self, and you're able to hold the space with the client. And you're basically introducing the client to the qualities of the self. So you become the symbol of the self in the room. You're containing the numinosity. And the numinosity of the self manifests directly as these human qualities: love, compassion, joy, and equanimity. So, if the client is walking in deep in depression, well, you're holding aliveness for the client. You're holding joy for the client. You're holding hope for the client. You're acting as the other half. The shadow of the client is gold. What they're living out is hell. So you're holding the gold in the room for the client, and your job in the constellation of the relationship is to introduce the client to these qualities. You see, you're just the messenger of the gods in a way. So in doing that, you're introducing the inner healer. You're introducing the client to their own inner healer. You're bringing awareness to their unconscious process. You're shining a light into their process through the presence of your own inner healer. See, you're sitting in the room as the healer, so it's available to you. So you're shining a light into the client's unconscious process, and you're introducing them to their inner healer, their qualities of love, compassion, joy, and equanimity. And in that way, the archetype is constellated. How do we constellate something like that? We do it through our association with it. How do we open up a symbol? We do it through our association with the symbol. We enter into the world of the symbolic alongside the symbol. We kneel before the altar. We interact with the symbol. You see, we enter into a relationship with the symbol, but not just at the surface. We enter into the depth. We move into the realm of the symbolic, where the heart of the symbol is. And through our sight, through bringing our sight, through seeing the presence of the God within the symbol, through developing a relationship with the numinous within the symbol, the numinous enters into it. It then extends relatedness to us and pulls us more in. To see how it works. We're doing it all the time without realizing it. You know, we do it in nature. Every time we go out into nature, we see the wonderful gift that nature is. But do we enter into the symbolic realm with nature? Do we enter into living nature? Do we experience the aliveness in nature? Or do we just say, oh, there's a tree and there's a bird and there's a duck? Do you see? Do we just see it from a surface position, or do we actually move into it? As we move into it, we become more alive. We're constellating the art. We're opening up the symbol, entering into the symbolic, and we're opening up a relationship with the numinosity within it. We're constellating this wounded healer archetype within ourself, the archetype of the self. So that's one bit. Okay, what else can I say? I had a very short number of notes here. The other thing I wanted to talk about was this false empathy.
Stuart?
Unconscious empathy, yeah.
Stuart, there's a question from Dennis here. You can't see them because it's my hosting the Zoom.
Okay, yeah.
Dennis was asking if you could explain a bit more about the concept of numinosity.
Okay.
Numinosity.
The God.
Yeah.
The numen, a Latin word, I suppose, Greek word, I don't know where it comes from. The numen is the God. So numinosity, the energy of the God, the shine of the sun. Do you see the quality of the God? So the energy, it's like the self-illuminating principle of Dharmakaya, the self-illumination of mind, the numinosity. I think it's quite coincidental, if you want to call it that numinosity is so similar to luminosity. Those two words side by side, luminosity glows in the dark, and numinosity, the energy given out by the God. So the eminence, the shine of the sun. You walk into a place of worship, a place of prayer, and you will immediately become aware of this presence. Do you see it? If you walk into a meditation room, a place where practice is done, you will immediately, no doubt, become aware that something has been going on in this room, in this space. So what you're feeling is the presence of numinosity. You see, in the same way, something that takes your breath away. You know, if you see a wonderful sunrise or a sunset, a vista, you know, the whole vista of nature in front of you, takes your breath away. The affect of the numinosity. You see it, it's heartfelt. It goes into you as a felt experience. Okay, so that's what I mean by numinosity. Does that clarify, Dennis? Yeah. Okay. So we from our position, 2 legs, 2 arms, and a head type of thing, beating heart, we enter into this inner space from the outside. We are very separate within our egos. So as we step into the space from the outside, all that we can do is have a relationship with, because this other thing is not me. Do you see, that's the way it appears at first principle. This other thing is not me. The God is not me. I'm separate, which is our own wounded nature. But as I step into a relationship with, you know, the God within myself, the Gnostic Christ, then I'm opening up this relationship, this inner relationship with my inside. And the relatedness is felt as a felt experience within me. The numinosity begins to travel through me, and it begins to heal me. It brings light to my dark soul. Do you know, it begins to give me life. I enter into this moment of self-creation. I am born again. Do you see, there's this, oh, I feel great this morning. And then I slide back down the slide and I feel terrible in the evening. I'm back into my unconscious position. And then I need to go back in next week for another hit of the therapist. Do you see, the wonderful therapist who heals me? I need to go back in for more of them. I'm not seeing it within myself. I'm seeing the healer within them. So part of the therapeutic process is to give back the power. It's to help the client to see that, hey, I'm just an ordinary person, just like you, working with my shit. You know, it's no different. So this equalization needs to happen in the room as well as the process unfolds. I'm not your parent. To see, mummy and daddy, all these projections that are put out in the beginning of the therapeutic process, they're all taken back over a period of time through the presence of this healer aspect within the room. Now, in the beginning, this presence of love in the room is very intoxicating. It's very seductive. Whether the client falls in love with the therapist or the therapist falls in love with the client, the presence of love is in the room. So any blocked need that you have to be loved is going to be dancing around this table. Do you see, it's so easy to fall into a state of participation mystique with the client. It's so easy to enter unconsciousness with the client and not hold good ground. So empathy, the shadow of empathy is attachment or disassociation. Take the opposite. This attachment or aversion, I suppose, which is another form of attachment, you need to be aware of it. That you're not holding on to the client's woes and identifying through them yourself. So that empathy can be a real sort of feeling highway, a road that can be used so that the process can further mature. Empathy is the environment of empathy, an empathic environment, so that compassion can become present. See, you're holding love around the client. You're holding this quality of unconditional positive regard around the client through non-judgment, through understanding, through acceptance, you know, through being able to see through the judgment that the client brings in. And this is all part of the constellation of this inner healer. Now, the relationships in the room. Okay, I just say a little bit more before I move on to that. This empathy, this quality of empathy, it needs to be very conscious that you know, I need to be able to see the client clearly in order to have compassion with the client. If I can't see the client, well, then there's a possibility I'm right in there with them. You see, so you know, sitting back into the back of your chair as therapist, being able to, you know, shove your bum right into the back of your chair, put your feet flat on the ground, and hear what the client is saying from the far side of the room. Be present in the room as much as present to the client, holding your own ground. There's me, and there's you, and there's the relationship. You see, the manifestation of the archetype is within the relationship. Do you get that? The qualities that you're bringing to the table are placed into the dyad, placed into the relationship. And that's where the manifestation of the archetypal figure happens. The archetypal figure is nothing more than the qualities of the self. So when you're reading this stuff, you'll no doubt see the words archetypal figure. And if you think of just qualities, qualities of the archetype made manifest. So through a conscious empathy, we develop compassion. Now, the shadow of compassion is power. So I have no power to create healing in another person. I can't even see my own hand to get a splinter out. So what chance have I got of do you know what I mean? I'm helpless in the room. That's me as a person. But within me, there is a power. Just as within you, there is a power. So the shadow of compassion is this owning of that power, where I tried to steal the fire of the gods and have it for my own. Do you see? So we got to stay down the mountain. No climbing up to the top of the mountain in order to steal the fire of the gods. Keep your feet on the ground. Be your ordinary self, and recognize the presence of the self in the room. Recognize the presence of the sacred. And through your recognition of the sacred within yourself and within the room, then this archetype opens up. The ego self axis is opened. So the relationships that are taking place, you got therapist to client, you know, me and you sitting in the room. I might be the client, you're the therapist. Okay, so there's me, and that's above the table. I'm wounded, you're the healer. I project all of this stuff onto you, and I'm turning you into the positive parent. I'm giving you my power. You've done your work, hopefully, so you know your wounds. So the inner healer within you is conscious in the room. You're sitting in the chair as your healing self, and the woundedness is your shadow. So there's always going to be work not yet completed. So you are bringing your shadow into the room. So you got to be aware of that aspect of yourself as therapist. Now, on the other side of the room, there's me as client. I'm sitting there in my story. I'm identifying through my victim, or, you know, I'm suffering in some way. And my shadow represents my own healer. So I'm in, my shadow is gold, but it's unavailable to me. My shadow is unconscious. This gold in me is unconscious. So you as healer, conscious healer in the room, has to reach across the room and develop a relationship with my unconscious shadow. See, that's one relationship that's going on. And my shadow is naturally going to reach across the room to your healer aspect and identify with you. But it's going to happen in an unconscious way, because that is an unconscious process in me. So the way that my inner healer first manifests in the room is in the form of a parental projection. I put positive mother, positive father onto you as therapist. I give you this power. That's the early stages of me connecting with my own healing ability within myself. Do you understand? The relationship between the therapist and the client's shadow is brought to light within the parental projection, the positive projection that takes place in the room. Oh, you're a great therapist. Do you see? That's a regressed place for the client. There's the regression in the client. Okay. So there's also a relationship going on under the table between my shadow and your shadow. My shadow as my own unworked shadow, my issues that have not yet been completed, and your shadow, your inner healer. So there's a part of me looking for healing from you. There's a part of me looking for healing from you. There's a part of the therapist looking for healing from the client. And this is an unconscious dynamic. So this is the one you got to be aware of, because this is where the whole thing can go into its opposite. You see, and you identify where you put the projection onto the client, this countertransference in some ways. You see, and that you got to be aware of what your own shadow is doing. So they're the relationships that are going on in the room. As far I think I've covered them all. The whole thing really hinges. See, sometimes the words make it very big and very complicated, and it doesn't need to be complicated. The felt experience is very straightforward. The felt experience is through these qualities of love, compassion, joy, and equanimity. The presence of your own inner healer is felt within your own joyfulness, within your own spaciousness. Do you see, have you opened up your own spaciousness? Are you happy on the inside? Do you have compassion? Have you gotten to the place inside yourself where you can self-accept? Do you see, this is the inner healer in action. And if you have those qualities, well, then you are absolutely qualified to do this job. See, in a way, the academic stuff is necessary for the world, but the more felt experience, this inner experience, is really the real qualification for doing the job. Now, you also need the instruction and the words and the thinking aspect in order to be able to present it and give it a container. To see this egoic substance, your own understanding, your own realizations, this is important as well, to act as a container for these more subtle qualities. No container, no qualities. You see, you can't collect water with a bucket with a hole.